Blood drips.
The sun rises, casting a shimmering glow on the vibrant autumn leaves, painting a breathtaking scene along the back roads between Michigan and Canada. The kaleidoscope of changing trees guides an old Ford pickup truck as it winds through the curves, slicing through the stunning landscape. It is a truly spectacular sight at this time of year. Amidst the chaos of this world, Mike Jr. finds solace in this natural beauty. As he navigates the truck, his father, Mike Sr., sits quietly in the passenger seat, gazing out the window, soaking in the splendor of the fall in the peninsula. "We're crossing into Canada," Mike Jr. announces to his father as he pulls their truck up to a small booth at the border crossing. The border agent takes their passports and asks, "What's the reason for your visit?" "Just a little father-son vacation to enjoy the scenery in the great white north," Mike replies, his words rolling off his tongue with ease. But he knows it's far from the truth. This is no vacation. They are headed to an experimental cancer treatment center just outside of Toronto. Mike Sr. has stage 4 lung cancer, likely the result of spending years chasing fumes at the Ford factory with countless Marlboro Reds. The institute is their last hope, and fortunately, it is far more affordable thanks to Canada's healthcare system. It is a necessary lie to avoid any potential complications at the border. As another agent completes his inspection, leading a drug-sniffing dog around the truck, the agent in the booth finally speaks. "Enjoy your visit," he says, handing back their passports. "Thanks," Mike Sr. responds, while Mike Jr. simply nods, putting the truck into gear and driving forward into the unknown. A father and son, bound together against overwhelming odds. It has always been that way for them. Mike Jr. grew up in a small town, about an hour outside Detroit, where Mike Sr. worked long, grueling shifts at the factory to provide for his son. Despite the late nights spent unwinding with a few beers and cigarettes, he was always a devoted father, never harsh, always compassionate, even under the weight of his own heartbreak. Mike Jr.'s mother left when he was just 3, vanishing from their lives without a trace. From that moment on, it was just the two of them, taking on the world together. A rosary sways gently in the rearview mirror, a recent addition since Mike Jr. found faith. He clings to it desperately, searching for hope, praying for a miracle. The thought of losing his father so young is unbearable. He dreams of the day his father might meet his future grandchildren, so he prays every night, pleading for more time. Mike Jr. knows that the years of bitterness have stripped his father of hope, and he can't blame him. But still, he holds on, believing enough for the both of them. As they continue their journey, Mike Sr. shifts his gaze from the passing scenery and looks at his son. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," he says, his voice tinged with emotion. Mike Jr. glances over, placing his hand on his father's shoulder. "I love you, Pops." They fall into a comfortable silence, letting the quiet speak for them as the old Ford truck weaves its way down the winding roads toward Toronto. As the truck pulls up to the sprawling modern medical institute, Mike Sr. blurts out, "This is a nice place. Are you sure we can afford it?" "We'll manage," Mike Jr. replies, keeping his tone steady. In truth, it's taken everything. The early cash out from his father's 401k, and every dollar Mike Jr. has scraped together from countless shifts at the gas station. But he doesn't let on. Not now. They sit in the waiting room, anxiety etched on their faces, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The door opens, and a nurse calls out, "Clemens?" She leads them back to an examination room, where she begins taking Mike Sr.'s vitals and drawing a blood sample. Turning to him, she says, "You will need to stay at the institute for the duration of your treatment. We have a room ready for you." "The whole 6 weeks? We didn't know that," Mike Jr. blurts out, worry creeping into his voice. The money they have scraped together will not stretch that far. Mike Jr. hoped there would be times when his father could come home, allowing him to pick up extra shifts at the gas station and avoiding the mounting overnight stay charges. "We'll make it work," Mike Sr. replies, giving his son a reassuring nod. Though life has tried to crush his spirit, he refuses to give in. For his son's sake, he will keep fighting. He cannot bear the thought of leaving him to face this unforgiving world alone. The nurse escorts them to the room where Mike Sr. will be staying and lays down a set of hospital clothes on the bed. "Get comfortable and we'll be back shortly to draw some blood," she instructs. "More blood?" Mike Jr. asks, a hint of concern in his voice. "Yes, it's for the treatment," she reassures him. Mike Jr. finds it odd, but decides to trust the process. After all, this place is known for working miracles, and he will do anything to save his father. As the nurse leaves, Mike Jr. turns to his dad. "I'm going to check in at the motel, but I'll be back tonight to bring you some of your stuff." "Sounds good, son," Mike Sr. replies. They share a warm embrace, and Mike Sr. gives his son a few reassuring pats on the back before he heads out. Mike Jr. navigates the elaborate maze of the sprawling institute. He is grateful for the maps posted at every corner. Without them, he would be hopelessly lost. As he makes his way toward the exit, something catches his eye through a slight ajar door. Instinctively, he glances inside. The room is enormous, lined with countless blood banks. The blood work must be crucial for the treatment, he thinks. As he continues to peer through the opening, he hears voices coming from inside. Adjusting his position to get a better view, he spots a groggy doctor slumped in a chair. The doctor is fading in and out of consciousness, while 2 nurses try to wake him and lift him up. Just then, one of the nurses notices Mike Jr. watching. She rushes to the door and slams it shut, startling him. Shaking off the unease, Mike Jr. heads for the exit, musing about how the doctors must truly work themselves to death in this place, especially if they are that exhausted after a shift. As Mike Jr. drives through the streets of Toronto on his way to the motel, he admires the Halloween decorations that adorn the city. The entire place buzzes with excitement for tomorrow's festivities. A smile creeps onto his face as he recalls his father taking him trick-or-treating through their small neighborhood when he was a kid. He dreams of sharing that same experience with his own children one day, with his father by his side to see it all. Mike Jr. arrives at the motel, checks in, and starts unloading their belongings from the truck. Once everything is inside, he begins packing a bag of essentials to bring to his father later that evening. Remembering the small church he passed on the way in, he decides to see if it is open, hoping to slip in for a quick prayer before heading back to the institute. Mike Jr. climbs the church steps and reaches for the door handle, giving it a firm pull. It does not budge. He sighs, assuming the church is closed, disappointed that he will not be able to pray before returning to see his father. Ever since his father's diagnosis, his faith has become a cornerstone in his life, offering comfort in these troubling times. It wouldn't hurt to ask for one more favor from above, especially when it concerns his father's life. He gives the door one last tug, just to be sure. This time, it swings open, and Mike jumps back to avoid getting hit. The door stops halfway, and a middle-aged black man pokes his head out. He looks haggard, with graying hair and a beard peeking out over his clerical collar. Deep bags sit under his eyes, hinting at many sleepless nights. "Can I help you?" the priest asks. "I was hoping to pray," Mike Jr. replies. "Now is not a good time. Come back on Sunday," the priest responds. "Please, it'll just take a few minutes," Mike Jr. pleads. The priest hesitates but reluctantly agrees, opening the door wider. "Quickly," he mutters. As Mike steps inside, he notices a pungent smell of gasoline clinging to both the priest and the church itself. He assumes there is some sort of maintenance issue, maybe a generator or heating system problem that has been keeping the priest up and working late. As the door closes behind them and they walk down the aisle, the priest turns to Mike. "I apologize for my harshness," he says. "God has called me to a greater purpose, and at times it has led me astray from my priestly duties. The house of God should always be open and welcoming." "I understand," Mike Jr. replies. "I just really needed to say a prayer for my father before I head back to the Institute." "The Institute? You don't mean the Vavoid Institute?" the priest asks sharply. "Yes, the Vavoid Institute. My father has late-stage cancer," Mike responds hesitantly. Without warning, the priest grabs Mike by both arms and spins him around. He stares intensely into his eyes. "Get your father out of there, tonight," he commands. "Why?" Mike stammers, taken aback. "It is not what you think it is. Your father is in grave danger. Please, if you have any trust in the Lord, as I know you do, get your father out of there as soon as possible. Right now!" The urgency in his voice is undeniable. Okay," Mike blurts out as the priest rushes him back toward the door. "Get your father out now," the priest repeats, practically shoving him outside before slamming the door shut. Mike stands there stunned. He quickly heads back to his truck, his heart racing with every step. He sits in his truck, still reeling from what just happened. That priest is out of his mind, he thinks, completely unhinged. The fumes from the gasoline must have clouded his head, yet despite brushing it off, a nagging sense of unease lingers. There has been something off about the Vavoid Institute. The excessive blood work, the doctor passed out in the blood bank. Unsure of what to believe, Mike decides to place it in God's hands. He glances at his dangling rosary and prays, asking for guidance as he makes his way back to the Institute. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows as Mike pulls up to the facility. He sits there in silence, letting the weight of the day settle over him. Finally, he decides to sleep on it, hoping that by morning he will have the clarity to make the right decision. Mike Jr. heads back into the Institute with his father's bag. He nods to the nurse at the front as he retraces his steps through the winding corridors. As he enters his father's room, he finds the nurse drawing blood from Mike Sr. once again. A wave of unease washes over him. Could the priest have been right? Is there something sinister happening at the Vavoid Institute? At that moment, Mike Jr. makes a decision. He has to get his father out of there. "Is that really necessary?" Mike Jr. blurts out, his voice edged with tension. The nurse shoots him a sharp look. "Yes, we're just finishing up." "It is okay, son," Mike Sr. whispers weakly, trying to reassure him. As the nurse leaves, Mike Jr. moves closer to his father's bed. "Hey, Pops, I think we should spend the night at a motel." "What do you mean? I can't leave," Mike Sr. murmurs, barely able to keep his eyes open. "We'll come back in the morning. It's fine, Pops." Mike Jr. insists, determined to get him out of there as soon as possible. He helps his father out of bed, and together they head for the door. Mike Sr. leans heavily on him, barely able to walk. Just as they reach the doorway, the nurse suddenly appears, blocking their path. "Where are you going?" she asks urgently. "We're heading to the motel to get our plans sorted," Mike Jr. replies, trying to stay calm. "As I mentioned before, we're not prepared for my father to stay here full time. We'll be back in the morning." "He can't leave. The treatment has already started. It's a risk not just to him, but to the public," the nurse says urgently. "The public?" Mike Jr. scoffs, his unease now turning into outright anger. He pushes past the nurse, guiding his barely conscious father down the hall. But just as they start to make their way, the nurse grabs Mike Sr. by the shoulder. "Get off him!" Mike Jr. shouts, pulling his father free. More nurses begin to scurry from around the corners, moving with an alarming urgency. Panic floods Mike Jr. as he finds an open hallway and drags his father down it. He pushes through the sea of staff that seem to multiply with every turn. He twists through the Institute's maze, desperately searching for an exit, until they are suddenly surrounded. The nurses, now more aggressive, close in, forming a barrier. Mike Jr. starts to back up when he notices a door behind him. He quickly ushers his father through it. He then slams it shut and props his father against the wall. Without hesitation, he pulls his father's belt from the bag and ties it around the door handles as tightly as he can. Outside, the nurses pound on the door, shouting to be let in, slamming against it with increasing force. The belt holds, but Mike Jr. knows it is only a matter of time. Mike Jr. knows he has to find a way out of a void, and fast. He checks his phone. No service. Panic tightens in his chest as he picks his father up from against the wall and sets him in a nearby chair. Taking a moment to gather himself, Mike Jr. looks around and realizes they are in a room with circular stadium seating, like some sort of old-fashioned surgical theater. In the center, a large glass enclosure looms with an operating room below it. He hears faint noises coming from inside. Heart pounding, he cautiously approaches the glass enclosure to get a closer look. 3 ropes dangle from the enclosure to the operating room. They are arranged in a triangle, and at the end of each rope hangs a person. 2 older women and a middle-aged man, all naked, bound, and gagged. They are suspended upside down, squirming in fear, struggling against their restraints. Mike Jr. freezes, a wave of horror washing over him. The priest was right. There's something terribly wrong here. Suddenly, 3 ominous figures enter the operating room below. Draped in black robes, each one stands under a dangling body. They begin to disrobe, and Mike Jr.'s breath catches in his throat as he recognizes them. It is the doctor and 2 nurses he saw earlier in the blood bank. Now they stand naked beneath the bound victims, their expressions unnervingly serene. The doctor steps forward, holding a small surgical knife. He moves methodically from one dangling body to the next, and without hesitation, begins to slit their throats. Blood gushes from their wounds, spraying across the operating room as their bodies convulse. Mike Jr. stumbles back, eyes wide in disbelief, as the doctors and nurses rub the blood across their own naked bodies, smearing it all over themselves with frenzied abandon. They begin to kiss and embrace, their blood-soaked forms merging as they dissolve into a grotesque, ritualistic display of intimacy beneath the lifeless bodies. Mike Jr. feels his stomach turn, and he knows with absolute certainty he and his father have to escape. Mike Jr. is horrified by what he is witnessing, the bile rising in his throat. The only comfort is that his father, seated farther back, is spared from seeing this nightmare unfold below. Panic sets in. He needs to get himself and his father out of there. Just then, he realizes the frantic pounding on the door has stopped. In its place, a stern, deliberate knock. "Son, are you in there?" The priest's voice calls out from the other side. Mike Jr., trembling, slowly unties the belt from the door handle and cracks the door open. There stands the priest. He is holding a large wooden cross, with unconscious nurses sprawled on the ground behind him. "Come, hurry, my son. We need to get you and your father out of here," the priest urges. Without hesitation, Mike Jr. lifts his father from the chair and drags him out of the operating theater. They follow the priest into the hallway, hoping that he is leading them toward safety. With his father clinging to his side, Mike Jr. follows as the priest navigates the labyrinth of corridors, heading toward the front exit. As they round the final corner into the lobby, they come face to face with 3 murderers, now stripped of their human facade. Still naked and drenched in blood, they stand there, but something has changed. Long, sharp fangs protrude from their mouths, and their fingertips have elongated into claw-like nails. They have transformed into demonic, vampiric creatures. Mike Jr. freezes, paralyzed by shock and fear, while his father, barely conscious, sags against him, completely unaware of the horror now standing before them. The priest turns to Mike Jr. and presses a lighter into his hand. "I'm going to clear a path. When you get outside, light it," he commands. "What?" Mike Jr. stammers, confusion written across his face. "Light it!" the priest shouts before charging toward the demonic figures, lifting his large wooden cross like a weapon. With fierce determination, he swings the cross at the vampires, forcing them back from the exit. They retaliate, slashing at him with their razor-sharp claws and tearing into his flesh. But the priest holds his ground, creating just enough of an opening for Mike Jr. and his father to escape. Seizing the chance, Mike Jr. drags his father toward the glass doors, desperately pushing forward. As they squeeze past the fighting, blood spatters onto them from the brutal struggle between the priest and the demons. They make it through the doors to the outside, finally free from the horrors inside the institute. As they make their way up the walkway, Mike Jr. notices a small group of patients gathered in the parking lot, likely others saved by the priest. He glances back toward the institute's entrance and sees the priest still locked in battle, swinging his cross at the vampires, who continue to claw and bite at his flesh. It is clear the priest does not have much fight left in him. Then, just to the left of the glass doors, Mike Jr. spots a gasoline jug with a rag hanging from the spout. That is what he meant, Mike Jr. realizes. He wants me to light it. A thought flashes through his mind. Could he possibly save the priest and light the canister? He rushes back to the doors, ready to try. As Mike approaches the glass doors, he sees the priest gripping his cross with both hands, using it as a physical barrier to hold the vampires back. The priest sees Mike Jr. reaching for the door handles and snaps a look at him. He slowly shakes his head back and forth to signal, no. Mike Jr. knows what he has to do. There might be no saving the priest, but he can save everyone else. He turns to the gasoline jug, fumbling with the lighter as his hands shake. It struggles for a few clicks, but finally, the flame ignites. He touches the lighter to the rag, and it bursts into flames. Without wasting a second, Mike Jr. sprints back to his father, helping him toward the safety of the parking lot. Just as they reach the others, a small explosion erupts behind them. The gasoline canister detonates, igniting a ring of gasoline that seems to circle the entire building. Within moments, the void is engulfed in flames. Through the glass doors, Mike Jr. catches a final glimpse of the priest. He is pushed up against the glass, using the last of his strength to keep the vampires at bay as they thrash desperately, trying to escape. The priest holds them off until both he and the vampires are swallowed by the roaring fire, disappearing completely into the inferno. As fire trucks and ambulances roll into the parking lot, Mike Jr. helps his father into the old Ford pickup. Paramedics begin tending to the other patients in the parking lot, while firefighters rush to tame the blaze consuming the void. Now that the other patients are safe, Mike Jr. thinks it is best to get out of there before the police arrive and start asking questions. He only has answers that they will never accept. He pulls out as the police begin to roll in. He quickly maneuvers out of Toronto and back on the roads that lead home to Michigan. Mike Sr. slowly starts to regain consciousness. Both men sit in silence, covered in blood. Whether it belongs to the priest, the vampires, or themselves, neither can say. As the sun rises over the horizon, painting the fall foliage in warm hues once again, father and son drape an arm around each other, holding on as they always have, defying the odds stacked against them. The light streams through the windshield, catching the rosary that swings gently from the rear-view mirror. Mike Jr. presses down on the gas while gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, the sunlight glinting off his blood-stained hand as the blood drips.